In the ancient kingdom of Valdoria, where centuries of tradition governed every breath taken within the palace walls, no one could have predicted that a single night would unravel the very fabric of the royal bloodline. When 17-year-old Princess Elena, beloved daughter of Queen Isabella and third in line to the throne, vanished without a trace during the Grand Harvest Festival, the kingdom's most trusted protector would make a decision so shocking that it would echo through the marble halls for generations to come. Sir Marcus Blackwood, captain of the Royal Guard for 23 years, had sworn an oath written in blood and sealed with ancient magic to protect the royal family above all else. But, when the Queen's adopted son, Prince Adrian, a man whose claim to nobility came through marriage rather than birth, became the prime suspect in Princess Elena's disappearance, Marcus faced an impossible choice between loyalty and justice. What happened in those crucial 48 hours would not only determine the fate of a missing princess but would expose secrets buried so deep within the royal bloodline that they threatened to topple a monarchy that had ruled Valdoria for 800 years. Some truths, once revealed, can never be hidden again. Some actions, once taken, can never be undone. This is the story of how honor collided with power, how love battled duty, and how one man's decision changed the destiny of an entire kingdom forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Castle Valdoria as Sir Marcus Blackwood made his routine inspection of the palace grounds. At 52, Marcus carried himself with the bearing of a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to service. His steel-gray hair was cropped short, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his weathered hands bore the calluses of countless hours wielding both sword and responsibility. Today, however, something felt different. A tension hung in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The Grand Harvest Festival had concluded just 12 hours earlier with spectacular fireworks lighting up the night sky over the kingdom. Citizens had filled the streets, dancing until dawn, celebrating another prosperous year under Queen Isabella's reign. The palace had been alive with music, laughter, and the warm glow of hundreds of lanterns. Now, in the harsh light of morning, that joy felt like a distant memory. Marcus paused at the entrance to the East Wing, where the royal family's private quarters were located. Something was wrong. In his 23 years of service, he had developed an almost supernatural sense for danger, and every instinct he possessed was screaming warnings. The guards stationed at their posts seemed nervous, their eyes darting about rather than maintaining their usual steady watch. "Captain Blackwood," called a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Lieutenant Sarah Chen approaching at a rapid pace, her usually composed expression replaced by barely controlled panic. Sarah had served under Marcus for 8 years, rising through the ranks due to her sharp mind and unwavering dedication. If she was rattled, the situation was serious. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Sir, we have a situation with Princess Elena," Sarah said, lowering her voice as they moved away from the guards. "She never returned to her chambers last night after the festival. Her bed hasn't been slept in, and her personal maid found her evening gown discarded in the gardens near the old oak tree." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Princess Elena, at 17, was known for her adventurous spirit and occasional rebellion against royal protocol. She had inherited her mother's striking auburn hair and sharp green eyes, but, unlike Queen Isabella, Elena possessed a restless energy that often led her to test boundaries. Still, she had never disappeared entirely without word. "Have you informed the Queen?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. "That's the problem, sir. Queen Isabella left early this morning for the northern provinces to inspect the grain stores. She's not expected back for 3 days. And King Regent William is in the capital meeting with foreign ambassadors." Sarah paused, clearly struggling with her next words. "Sir, there's something else. Prince Adrian was seen arguing with Princess Elena near the gardens around midnight." Several witnesses reported raised voices, though no one could make out the words. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, processing this information. Prince Adrian had married into the royal family 5 years earlier when he wed Princess Catherine, Queen Isabella's eldest daughter. Catherine had died in a tragic riding accident just 2 years later, but Adrian had remained at court, maintaining his royal title and position. At 34, Adrian was handsome, charismatic, and ambitious. He had always seemed to harbor resentment about being an outsider in a family bound by 8 centuries of bloodline tradition. Where is Prince Adrian now? Marcus asked. In his chambers, sir. He claims he went directly to bed after the festival and has no knowledge of Princess Elena's whereabouts. He seems genuinely concerned, but... Sarah trailed off, her meaning clear. Marcus understood her hesitation. In the complex world of royal politics, appearances could be deceiving, and even genuine emotion could mask darker truths. Prince Adrian's position in the succession had always been precarious. While he held his title through marriage, he had no blood claim to the throne. If something happened to Queen Isabella, the crown would pass to Prince Michael, her younger brother, since Princess Catherine was deceased and Princess Elena was still unmarried with no children. Gather a search party, Marcus ordered. I want every inch of the palace grounds and the surrounding forest searched. Deploy teams to the village and question anyone who might have seen the princess after midnight. And, Lieutenant, this information stays between us for now. We don't need panic spreading through the kingdom before we understand what we're dealing with. Yes, sir. There's one more thing. Sarah hesitated again. The night guards reported seeing someone in dark clothing near the castle walls around 2 a.m. They assumed it was one of the festival cleanup crew, but, now we can't assume anything, Marcus finished. Post additional guards at all entrances and exits. No one enters or leaves the palace without my personal authorization. And, I want Prince Adrian under discreet surveillance. Don't make it obvious, but I want to know his every movement. As Sarah hurried away to carry out his orders, Marcus stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. The oath of the royal guard was more than ceremonial words spoken during his initiation. It was a binding commitment, sealed with ancient magic that connected every guard to the royal bloodline itself. Marcus could literally feel the distress emanating from the castle, as if the very stones were crying out for their missing princess. He made his way to Princess Elena's chambers, hoping to find some clue that might explain her disappearance. The rooms were exactly as her maid had described: bed unslept in, evening clothes scattered, and no sign of struggle. But, as Marcus examined the space more carefully, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On Elena's writing desk lay an unfinished letter. The parchment was expensive, bearing the royal seal, but the words written in Elena's distinctive handwriting told a story that Marcus wished he had never read. My dearest friend, the letter began, I fear I must tell someone what I have discovered, for if something should happen to me, the truth must not die with me. I have learned something about Adrian that changes everything. The accident that killed Catherine was no accident at all. I have proof that. The letter ended abruptly, the ink still fresh, suggesting it had been written recently. Marcus carefully folded the parchment and placed it inside his jacket. This changed everything. If Princess Elena had discovered evidence of Prince Adrian's involvement in his own wife's death, her disappearance took on a far more sinister meaning. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called, turning to find Prince Adrian himself standing in the doorway. The prince was impeccably dressed as always, his dark hair perfectly styled, but Marcus noticed the tension around his eyes and the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Captain Blackwood, Adrian said, his voice carrying its usual smooth confidence. I heard about Elena's disappearance. This is terrible news. I want you to know that I'm placing all of my personal resources at your disposal to find her. She's like a sister to me. Marcus studied the man's face, searching for any sign of deception. Adrian had always been skilled at reading people and situations, a talent that had served him well in royal politics. But, today, something felt different about him. There was an undercurrent of desperation beneath his polished exterior. Thank you, Your Highness. I appreciate your concern. I understand you spoke with Princess Elena last evening during the festival. Can you tell me about that conversation? Adrian's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught a brief flicker of something: surprise, perhaps, or calculation. We exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. Elena seemed to be enjoying the festivities. I was surprised to learn she didn't return to her chambers. Several witnesses reported hearing raised voices during your conversation, Marcus pressed gently. Witnesses can be mistaken, Captain. The festival was quite loud, with music and celebration everywhere. Perhaps what they heard was simply the need to speak loudly over the noise. Adrian's smile never wavered, but his eyes had grown cold. "I trust you're not suggesting that I had anything to do with Elena's disappearance." That would be a very serious accusation indeed. Marcus felt the implicit threat in those words. Prince Adrian might not have royal blood, but he wielded considerable political influence. Accusing him without ironclad proof could destroy Marcus's career and potentially destabilize the kingdom during Queen Isabella's absence. "I'm simply gathering information, Your Highness. I must investigate every lead, no matter how unlikely it might seem." "Of course," Adrian replied smoothly. "I understand completely. Just remember, Captain, that in times of crisis, it's important to separate fact from speculation. The kingdom depends on strong, reliable leadership. We can't afford to let emotions cloud our judgment." After Adrian left, Marcus sat heavily in Elena's chair, feeling the full weight of his position. The unfinished letter in his jacket seemed to burn against his chest. If Elena had indeed discovered evidence of Prince Adrian's involvement in Catherine's death, and if Adrian knew about her investigation, then the princess wasn't just missing, she was in mortal danger. But Marcus also understood the political implications of his suspicions. Without concrete evidence, moving against Prince Adrian would be seen as the actions of an overreaching servant attacking his betters. The noble families that supported Adrian would rally to his defense, potentially fracturing the kingdom's unity. Queen Isabella would return to find her realm in chaos, her daughter missing, and her most trusted protector branded a traitor. As afternoon faded into evening, the search parties returned with no trace of Princess Elena. The village had been thoroughly searched, the forest combed by experienced trackers, and every possible hiding place within the castle examined. It was as if the princess had simply vanished into thin air. Marcus stood on the battlements as the sun set, watching the shadows grow longer across the kingdom he had sworn to protect. Somewhere out there, Princess Elena was either dead or fighting for her life. In the chambers below, a man who might be a grieving brother-in-law or a cold-blooded killer was continuing his charade of concern and cooperation. The ancient magic of the royal guard oath pulsed through Marcus's veins, connecting him to the pain of the royal bloodline. He could feel Elena's distress like a physical ache in his chest, confirming that she was still alive but in terrible danger. The magic also whispered something else, that the choices he made in the coming hours would echo through history, defining not just his own legacy but the fate of the kingdom itself. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would not wait for Queen Isabella's return or seek permission from distant authorities. The evidence might be incomplete, but his instincts and the ancient magic of his oath were screaming the same message. Prince Adrian was responsible for Princess Elena's disappearance, and every moment of delay increased the danger to her life. Tomorrow would bring consequences that would reshape the kingdom forever. Tonight, Sir Marcus Blackwood would begin the most dangerous investigation of his career, knowing that failure would mean not just his own destruction, but the loss of the young woman he had watched grow from a spirited child into the kingdom's brightest hope for the future. The hunt for Princess Elena was about to become a battle for the very soul of Valdoria. Dawn broke grey and cold over Castle Valdoria, matching the grim mood that had settled over the palace like a burial shroud. Sir Marcus Blackwood had not slept, spending the long hours of darkness poring over palace records, guard reports, and witness statements. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting, painting a picture that grew darker with each piece of information he uncovered. In the privacy of his office, Marcus spread out the documents he had gathered throughout the night. The unfinished letter from Princess Elena's chambers sat at the center of his makeshift investigation board, surrounded by other troubling discoveries. Financial records showed that Prince Adrian had been quietly moving large sums of money to accounts in neighboring kingdoms. Guard duty rosters revealed suspicious gaps in security coverage during recent weeks, always coinciding with Adrian's presence in sensitive areas of the castle. Most damning of all was a report from 2 years earlier that Marcus had nearly forgotten. In the weeks following Princess Catherine's fatal riding accident, the stable master had approached Marcus with concerns about the horse that had thrown her. The animal, normally gentle and reliable, had been found with a small puncture wound on its flank that could have been caused by a sharp object. The stable master's suspicions had been dismissed at the time as the grief-driven imagination of a man who blamed himself for the tragedy. Now, with Princess Elena missing and her unfinished letter revealing her suspicions about Catherine's death, those dismissed concerns took on new and terrifying significance. If Adrian had murdered his own wife to maintain his position at court, what would he do to protect himself from exposure? A soft tap at the door interrupted Marcus's thoughts. Lieutenant Saracen entered, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested she had spent an equally sleepless night. "Sir, I have the surveillance reports on Prince Adrian," she said, setting the coffee down and taking a seat across from his desk. "He left his chambers twice during the night. Once at approximately 11 p.m., returning an hour later. The second time was at 3 in the morning, and he was gone for nearly 2 hours." Marcus leaned forward intently. "Did the guards track his movements?" "That's where it gets interesting, sir. Both times, Adrian used servants' passages that most of the palace guard doesn't even know exist. Our men lost him in the maze of corridors beneath the East Wing. When I pressed them for details, they admitted they didn't want to appear incompetent by reporting that they'd lost sight of a member of the royal family. The East Wing basement corridors were part of the castle's original construction, built 8 centuries earlier when Valdoria was constantly under threat from neighboring kingdoms. The passages connected to ancient tunnels that led beyond the castle walls, providing secret escape routes during times of siege. If Adrian knew about these passages, and, as someone who had lived in the palace for 5 years, he certainly could have discovered them, he would have had the perfect means to move Elena without being detected. "Sir," Sarah continued, lowering her voice even further, "there's something else. I took the liberty of questioning some of the kitchen staff about the festival preparations. One of the cooks mentioned that Prince Adrian requested a specific type of sleeping herb for his chambers, claiming he had trouble sleeping after large celebrations. The herb is powerful enough that even a small amount could render someone unconscious for hours." Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. Adrian had the means, motive, and opportunity to abduct Princess Elena. More importantly, he had demonstrated a willingness to kill to protect his position, if the suspicions about Catherine's death proved accurate. The question now was whether Elena was still alive and, if so, where Adrian might be holding her. "Lieutenant, I need you to quietly gather a small team of our most trusted guards. Men who have served with distinction and whose loyalty to the royal bloodline is absolute. We're going to search those basement passages and tunnels, but we must do so without alerting Prince Adrian to our suspicions." "Sir, shouldn't we wait for additional authorization? If we're wrong about this, the consequences could be severe." Marcus understood her concern, but the ancient magic pulsing through his veins was growing stronger, more urgent. Princess Elena's distress was becoming almost overwhelming, suggesting that time was running out. "Lieutenant, I've served this kingdom for 23 years. I've seen wars, famines, political upheavals, and threats both external and internal. Never have I felt the certainty I feel now. Princess Elena is in immediate danger, and Prince Adrian is responsible. We can wait for proper authorization and likely find her body, or we can act now and possibly save her life." Sarah nodded grimly. "I'll gather the team, sir. How do you want to proceed?" "We'll split into 2 groups. You'll take 3 men and search the tunnels that lead north toward the old quarry. I'll take the remaining men and investigate the passages that head east toward the abandoned monastery. If Adrian is holding Elena somewhere, it would need to be a location where her cries for help wouldn't be heard, but close enough for him to maintain control of the situation." As Sarah left to assemble the search teams, Marcus returned to studying the ancient blueprints of the castle that he had retrieved from the royal archives. The network of tunnels was more extensive than he had realized, with some passages leading several miles beyond the castle walls. Many of the original exit points had been sealed over the centuries, but a determined person could still find ways to access the underground network. His attention was drawn to one particular tunnel that led to the ruins of St. Aldrich's Monastery, about 3 miles east of the castle. The monastery had been abandoned for over a century after a fire destroyed much of the structure, but the stone foundations and underground chambers remained intact. It would be the perfect place to hold someone prisoner, isolated, forgotten, and accessible only to those who knew the secret passages. Marcus was gathering his weapons and preparing to depart when another knock interrupted his preparations. This time, it was Prince Adrian himself who entered without waiting for permission, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. His clothes, while still expensive, looked hastily put on, and there was a nervous energy about him that Marcus had never seen before.
"Captain Blackwood, I understand you're organizing search parties to look for Elena. I insist on joining the effort.
As a member of the royal family, I have both the right and the responsibility to participate in finding her." Marcus studied Adrian's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way his gaze kept darting toward the documents scattered across the desk. There was definitely something different about the prince's demeanor, a desperation that seemed to go beyond concern for a missing family member. "Your Highness, I appreciate your offer, but these searches require specialized training and familiarity with dangerous terrain. I wouldn't want to put you at risk unnecessarily."
"Risk?" Adrian's laugh had a sharp edge to it. "Captain, I've lived in this castle for 5 years.
I know every corridor, every hidden passage, every secret that these walls contain.
Perhaps better than you realize."
The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Adrian was essentially admitting his knowledge of the castle's secret passages, but was he making a veiled threat or simply trying to assert his usefulness to the search effort? "In that case, Your Highness, perhaps you could assist by providing us with detailed information about any areas of the castle or surrounding grounds that might be suitable for hiding someone against their will."
Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, becoming more guarded. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, Captain. Are you suggesting that Elena has been kidnapped rather than simply wandering off? That would be a very serious escalation of our concerns."
"I'm considering all possibilities, Your Highness.
A princess of Valdoria doesn't simply vanish without explanation.
The longer she remains missing, the more we must assume that foul play is involved."
"Of course, you're quite right to be thorough."
Adrian moved closer to Marcus's desk, his eyes clearly scanning the documents spread across its surface.
"What evidence have you uncovered so far? Perhaps I can help interpret anything that seems unusual or out of place."
Marcus casually moved to block Adrian's view of Elena's unfinished letter while appearing to organize his papers. "We're still gathering information, Your Highness. Nothing definitive yet, but several concerning patterns are emerging." The two men faced each other across the desk, each clearly aware that a dangerous game was being played. Marcus could see the calculation in Adrian's eyes, the mind of a man trying to determine how much his opponent knew and how best to respond. Adrian, meanwhile, was undoubtedly reading Marcus's carefully controlled expressions, looking for signs of suspicion or knowledge that might threaten his position. "Captain," Adrian said finally, his voice taking on a tone of reasonable authority, "I hope you'll remember that in the Queen's absence, I am the senior member of the royal family present at court.
Any major decisions regarding the search for Elena should be coordinated through me. We can't afford to have conflicting efforts or miscommunication during such a critical time."
The implicit assertion of authority was clear, but Marcus had spent too many years serving the crown to be intimidated by political maneuvering. "Your Highness, the safety and security of the royal family is my primary responsibility, as defined by my oath of service. I will certainly keep you informed of significant developments, but the tactical decisions regarding search operations fall under my jurisdiction." Adrian's smile became strained, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something far more dangerous beneath the polished exterior. "Captain Blackwood, I trust you understand the delicate nature of our situation. The kingdom is watching how we handle this crisis. Any actions that might be seen as overreaching could have serious consequences for everyone involved." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Adrian was warning Marcus against pursuing an investigation that might implicate him, using his political position to try to control the situation. But Marcus had made his decision the previous night, and no amount of intimidation would deter him from his duty to Princess Elena.
"I understand completely, Your Highness. The kingdom's stability is indeed paramount.
That's exactly why we must pursue every lead, no matter where it might take us." After Adrian left, Marcus gathered his equipment and prepared to join the search team heading toward the old monastery. He strapped on his sword, loaded his crossbow, and tucked Elena's unfinished letter securely in his jacket. If his suspicions proved correct, he would soon be facing the most dangerous adversary of his career, not a foreign enemy or common criminal, but a member of the royal family he had sworn to protect.
The irony was not lost on him.
The oath that bound him to defend the royal bloodline now required him to act against someone who had married into that same bloodline. The ancient magic that flowed through every royal guard was sending conflicting signals: duty to protect warring with duty to serve, loyalty to the crown clashing with loyalty to individual members of the royal family. As Marcus made his way to the castle's lower levels where his team was assembling, he reflected on the broader implications of what he was about to do. If he was right about Prince Adrian, and if he could prove the prince's guilt and rescue Princess Elena, he would be hailed as a hero. But if he was wrong, or if he couldn't provide sufficient evidence, he would be branded a traitor who had attacked a grieving member of the royal family during a time of crisis.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
Princess Elena's life hung in the balance, but so did the stability of the kingdom itself. Queen Isabella would return in 3 days to find either her daughter safely recovered and her son-in-law exposed as a murderer, or her most trusted protector in chains and her family torn apart by unfounded accusations. Marcus met his team at the entrance to the secret passages beneath the East Wing. 4 guards, each chosen for their absolute loyalty and proven courage, stood ready to follow him into the darkness. They had been briefed on the basic facts of the situation but not on Marcus's specific suspicions about Prince Adrian. If they found the princess, there would be time for explanations later. If they found her body, the evidence would speak for itself. Men, Marcus addressed his team quietly, what we do today may well determine the fate of our kingdom. Princess Elena is somewhere in these tunnels, and she's counting on us to find her before it's too late. Stay alert, watch each other's backs, and remember that we're not just searching for a missing person, we're fighting for the honor of the crown itself. As they descended into the ancient passages beneath Castle Valdoria, Marcus felt the weight of 8 centuries of history pressing down upon him. These tunnels had seen kingdoms rise and fall, had hidden fleeing royalty and pursuing enemies, had been the stage for countless acts of heroism and treachery. Now they would witness one more chapter in that long history, either the salvation of a princess and the exposure of a killer, or the destruction of the most trusted guardian in the realm. The hunt for Princess Elena was about to reach its climax, and Sir Marcus Blackwood was walking directly into the heart of darkness, guided only by his oath, his instincts, and the desperate hope that he was not already too late. The ancient tunnels beneath Castle Valdoria stretched into darkness like the throat of some enormous beast. Sir Marcus Blackwood led his small team of guards through the narrow stone passages, their torches casting dancing shadows on walls that had not seen sunlight for centuries. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old secrets, and Marcus could feel the weight of the castle above them pressing down like the judgment of history itself. They had been walking for nearly an hour, following the tunnel that led eastward toward the ruins of St. Aldrich's Monastery. The passage was older than the castle itself, carved from living rock by craftsmen whose names had been lost to time. Marcus ran his fingers along the rough stone walls, feeling for any sign of recent disturbance, any indication that someone else had traveled this route recently. Behind him, his 4 chosen guards moved with practiced silence. These were men he had trained personally, veterans who had proven their loyalty in battle and their discretion in peace.
Guard Captain Thomas Reed, a bear of a man with 20 years of service, brought up the rear. Corporal David Stone and Corporal James Wright flanked the formation, their crossbows ready.
Sergeant Michael Foster, Marcus's most trusted subordinate, walked just behind the captain, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow. "Sir," Sergeant Foster whispered, pointing to the ground near Marcus's feet.
"Look at this."
Marcus knelt and examined the spot Foster had indicated. There, in the soft dirt that had accumulated over decades of neglect, was a clear boot print. The impression was recent, the edges still sharp, and the size suggested a man's foot. More importantly, the pattern in the sole was distinctive, the kind of expensive craftsmanship that would be found only on boots worn by nobility. "Someone's been through here recently," Marcus murmured, his suspicions growing stronger.
"Stay alert, men. We may not be alone down here."
They continued forward, and Marcus began to notice other signs of recent passage. Disturbed dust on the walls where someone had steadied themselves, a few drops of candle wax that hadn't had time to gather the thick coating of grime that covered everything else in these forgotten tunnels.
Someone had definitely used this route, and recently. The tunnel began to slope upward, indicating they were nearing their destination.
According to the ancient maps Marcus had studied, they should be approaching the chambers beneath the old monastery. If Princess Elena was being held prisoner, this would be the most likely location, far enough from the castle to muffle any cries for help, but still accessible through the secret passages. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, Marcus suddenly held up his hand, signaling the others to stop. In the distance, he could see a faint glow that didn't come from their torches. Someone else was definitely ahead of them, and that someone had brought their own light source. Marcus extinguished his torch and motioned for the others to do the same. In the absolute darkness of the underground tunnels, they would need to rely on stealth rather than speed. The glow ahead provided just enough illumination to guide their way while hopefully preventing their own discovery. Moving with extreme caution, the 5 guards crept forward until they reached a junction where their tunnel intersected with a larger chamber. Marcus peered around the corner and felt his heart both soar and sink at what he saw. Princess Elena was there, alive but clearly in distress. She sat on the stone floor with her hands bound behind her back, her festival dress torn and dirty. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the defiant fire in her green eyes, the same spirit that had made her beloved throughout the kingdom. Standing over her with his back to the tunnel entrance was Prince Adrian. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. In his right hand, he held a dagger that caught the light from several oil lamps he had placed around the chamber. His voice carried clearly in the enclosed space as he spoke to his captive. "You should have minded your own business, Elena," Adrian was saying, his tone a mixture of frustration and desperation. Catherine was weak, unsuitable to be a future queen. Her death was a mercy to the kingdom, even if no one else could see it that way. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had to go digging into things that were better left buried. Princess Elena's voice was hoarse but strong when she replied. "Catherine was your wife, Adrian. She loved you, trusted you completely. How could you murder someone who never did anything but try to make you happy? Love?" Adrian laughed bitterly. "Catherine's love was suffocating me, trapping me in a life I never wanted. Do you think I enjoyed being the outsider, the man who married into royalty but could never truly belong? I had ambitions, Elena. Plans that went far beyond being a decorative husband to a naive princess." Marcus felt his jaw clench as he listened to Adrian's confession. The man was admitting to murdering his own wife, and his casual dismissal of Catherine's love revealed a coldness that went beyond anything Marcus had imagined. He signaled to his men, indicating they should prepare to move, but he wanted to hear more of Adrian's confession before acting. "And what about me?" Elena demanded. "What's your plan now? Kill me too and claim I had some tragic accident? How many people are you willing to murder to protect your precious position?" "That depends entirely on you, my dear sister-in-law," Adrian replied, kneeling down so he was at eye level with the bound princess. "You see, I've been thinking about our situation very carefully. There might be a way out of this that benefits us both." Elena stared at him with obvious disgust. "I would never make any kind of deal with you. You're a monster." "Listen to me carefully," Adrian continued, ignoring her revulsion. "Your mother is away for 3 days. During that time, tragic news will reach the capital. Prince Adrian was killed in a heroic attempt to rescue Princess Elena from bandits who had kidnapped her from the castle. The captain of the royal guard will confirm this story, having witnessed the prince's brave sacrifice firsthand." Marcus felt ice form in his veins as he realized what Adrian was suggesting. The prince intended to kill him and frame him for Elena's kidnapping, then stage his own death to appear as a hero who died trying to save her. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity and cunning. "You're insane if you think anyone would believe that," Elena said, but Marcus could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Am I?" Adrian smiled coldly. "Think about it, Elena. Captain Blackwood has been behaving strangely since your disappearance. Several witnesses can attest to his suspicious questions about my whereabouts and his obvious distrust of my motives. When his body is found alongside mine, it will be clear that he kidnapped you in some misguided attempt to frame me, and that I died heroically trying to stop him.
The plan was brilliant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. Adrian would kill both Marcus and Elena, then stage the scene to make it appear that Marcus had been the real villain all along. Given Adrian's political connections and ability to manipulate evidence, the story might actually be believed. And what happens to me in this elaborate fantasy? Elena asked.
Unfortunately, dear sister, you'll also be found dead, having perished despite my valiant rescue attempt. The kingdom will mourn its lost princess and its heroic prince, and I will return from the grave to comfort Queen Isabella in her grief. With Catherine dead, you dead, and Prince Michael conveniently absent in the Northern Territories, I'll be the most logical choice to serve as the Queen's chief advisor and eventual heir.
Marcus had heard enough. He signaled to his men and they moved swiftly but silently into the chamber, spreading out to surround Adrian before he became aware of their presence. The prince was so focused on his monologue that he didn't notice the shadows moving behind him until Sergeant Foster's crossbow bolt was aimed directly at his heart. "Drop the weapon, Your Highness," Marcus commanded, his own sword drawn and ready. "Prince Adrian of Valdoria, by the authority vested in me by the crown and the ancient laws of this kingdom, I place you under arrest for the kidnapping of Princess Elena and the murder of Princess Catherine." Adrian spun around, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and, finally, cold calculation. For a moment, Marcus thought the man might surrender peacefully, but then, Adrian's grip tightened on his dagger and he pulled Princess Elena roughly to her feet, holding the blade against her throat. "How very touching, Captain," Adrian sneered. "The loyal guard dog comes to save his master. But I'm afraid you're too late. One step closer and Princess Elena dies right here, right now." The standoff was exactly what Marcus had hoped to avoid. With Elena as a human shield, Adrian held all the advantages despite being outnumbered. One wrong move and the princess would be dead before any of them could react. "Your Highness," Marcus said carefully, "you're already facing charges that will see you executed. Don't make things worse by harming Princess Elena. Surrender now and I give you my word that you'll receive a fair trial." "A fair trial?" Adrian laughed harshly. "Captain, we both know how this ends if I surrender. I'll be tortured until I confess to crimes I may or may not have committed, then executed in front of a cheering crowd. At least this way, I have a chance." "A chance for what?" Elena gasped, the dagger pressed against her neck making it difficult to speak. "There's nowhere to run, Adrian. These tunnels only lead back to the castle or out to the forest, and both routes will be watched." "Perhaps," Adrian agreed, "but I still have one very valuable bargaining chip." He pressed the dagger closer to Elena's throat, and a thin line of blood appeared. "Captain Blackwood, here's my proposal. You and your men will escort me safely to the forest edge, where I'll have a horse waiting. Once I'm safely away, I'll release Princess Elena unharmed." Marcus weighed his options quickly. Adrian was desperate enough to kill Elena if he felt cornered, but he was also arrogant enough to believe he could still escape if given the chance. The key would be making him feel confident enough to lower his guard. "I'm willing to discuss terms," Marcus said slowly, "but first I need proof that you'll keep your word. Release Princess Elena's bonds and step back from her. Show me that you're negotiating in good faith." "Do you think I'm a fool?" Adrian snapped. "The moment I release her, your men will fill me with crossbow bolts." "No, Captain, Princess Elena stays exactly where she is until I'm safely away from this kingdom." The negotiation continued for several tense minutes, with Adrian growing more agitated and unpredictable with each exchange. Marcus could see the desperation building in the man's eyes, the realization that his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. Desperate men made fatal mistakes, and Marcus was counting on Adrian's growing panic to provide an opening. That opening came when Elena herself created it. With a sudden twist of her body, she drove her elbow backward into Adrian's ribs while simultaneously ducking away from the dagger at her throat. The move was perfectly timed and executed, giving Marcus's men the split second they needed to act. Sergeant Foster's crossbow bolt took Adrian in the shoulder, spinning him away from Elena. Guard Captain Reed charged forward, tackling the wounded prince to the ground before he could recover his balance.
Within moments, Adrian was disarmed and restrained, his plans for escape and revenge ended as suddenly as they had begun. As Marcus cut the bonds from Elena's wrists, she collapsed against him, the stress and fear of her ordeal finally overwhelming her royal composure.
"Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you would come for me. I knew someone would figure out what Adrian had done."
Marcus helped her to a sitting position and wrapped his cloak around her shoulders.
"Your Highness, I need you to tell me everything. From the moment Adrian took you until now. We'll need your testimony to ensure he faces justice for his crimes."
Over the next hour, as they waited for additional guards to arrive and secure the scene, Princess Elena told her story. She had indeed discovered evidence of Adrian's involvement in Catherine's death, financial records showing payments to the stable master who had later died under mysterious circumstances, along with a written confession the man had hidden before his death.
Elena had confronted Adrian during the festival, threatening to expose him to Queen Isabella upon her return.
Adrian had drugged Elena's wine during their argument, then carried her unconscious form through the secret passages to the monastery ruins. He had planned to keep her prisoner until he could arrange a more permanent solution, but Elena's earlier investigation had already set events in motion that he couldn't control. As Marcus listened to her account, he reflected on the chain of events that had led them to this moment. Elena's courage in investigating her sister's death, her determination to seek justice despite the danger to herself, had ultimately saved not just her own life but, potentially, the entire kingdom. If Adrian's plan had succeeded, he would have gained unprecedented power and influence, with no one left to challenge his ambitions. The return journey through the tunnels was markedly different from their earlier descent. Prince Adrian, wounded and defeated, was carried on a stretcher under heavy guard. Princess Elena, though exhausted and traumatized, walked with her head high, every inch the royal princess she had been raised to be. Marcus and his men maintained their professional vigilance, but there was an undercurrent of satisfaction in their bearing. They had done their duty and saved their princess. As they emerged into the castle courtyard, Marcus could see that word of their success had already begun to spread. Servants and guards lined the walkways, cheering as Princess Elena appeared, alive and safe. The relief on every face was palpable. The kingdom's beloved princess had been restored to them, and the threat to the royal family had been eliminated. But, even as he acknowledged the cheers and congratulations of his fellow guards, Marcus knew that the hardest part of their ordeal was yet to come. Prince Adrian would face trial for his crimes, but his political connections and the complex web of alliances he had built during his years at court would make conviction challenging. Moreover, Queen Isabella would return to find her family torn apart by betrayal and murder, her trust in those closest to her forever shattered. The kingdom of Valdoria had been saved from immediate crisis, but the scars left by Adrian's treachery would take much longer to heal. As Marcus helped Princess Elena to her chambers, he reflected on the price of justice and the heavy burden of those sworn to protect the crown. Some victories, he realized, came at a cost that would be felt for generations to come. 3 weeks after the rescue of Princess Elena from the monastery ruins, the Great Hall of Castle Valdoria had been transformed into a courtroom for the most significant trial in the kingdom's recent history. The massive stone chamber, normally used for state ceremonies and royal banquets, now housed the elaborate proceedings that would determine the fate of Prince Adrian and, by extension, the future stability of the realm. Queen Isabella had returned from her northern journey to find her kingdom in upheaval and her family forever changed. The woman who had ruled Valdoria with wisdom and compassion for 15 years now sat upon a specially constructed judicial throne, her face a mask of controlled anguish as she prepared to sit in judgment of the man who had murdered her eldest daughter and attempted to kill her youngest. Sir Marcus Blackwood stood at attention near the witness stand, his dress uniform immaculate despite the weight of responsibility that pressed upon his shoulders. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of investigations, interrogations, and political maneuvering as the full scope of Prince Adrian's crimes became clear. What had begun as the search for a missing princess had evolved into an examination of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the kingdom's nobility. The evidence against Adrian was overwhelming. Princess Elena's unfinished letter had been corroborated by the discovery of additional documents hidden in Adrian's private chambers, including detailed plans for eliminating other potential rivals to his imagined claim to the throne. The confession of the stable master who had died mysteriously 2 years earlier had been found sealed in a secret compartment, describing how Adrian had blackmailed him into sabotaging Princess Catherine's horse and, then, poisoned him to ensure his silence.
Yet despite the mountain of evidence, Adrian's trial had become a political battlefield.
Several noble families who had allied themselves with the prince during his years at court were now fighting to minimize their own involvement while protecting their interests. Lord Chancellor William Pemberton, Adrian's most influential supporter, had hired the kingdom's most skilled legal advocates to represent the accused, arguing that much of the evidence had been obtained through questionable means and that Adrian's confession under duress should be inadmissible. The trial had drawn observers from across the kingdom and beyond. Foreign ambassadors filled the gallery, eager to assess the stability of Valdoria's government during this crisis. Merchants and commoners pressed against the Great Hall's windows, straining to catch glimpses of the proceedings that would determine whether justice would be served or political expediency would prevail. On the fourth day of testimony, Marcus was called to present his evidence and account of the investigation that had led to Adrian's capture. As he approached the witness stand, he could feel the eyes of the entire kingdom upon him. His testimony would be crucial in establishing not just the facts of the case, but the legitimacy of his actions in pursuing and arresting a member of the royal family. Captain Blackwood, began Master Prosecutor Elizabeth Hartwell, a woman whose reputation for thoroughness and integrity had made her Queen Isabella's choice to lead the prosecution, please describe for the court the circumstances that led you to suspect Prince Adrian of involvement in Princess Elena's disappearance. Marcus had rehearsed this moment countless times, but, standing before the assembled nobility of Valdoria, he felt the full weight of his decision to act without explicit authorization. Your Majesty, he began, addressing Queen Isabella directly as protocol demanded, my suspicions began when I discovered Princess Elena's unfinished letter in her chambers. The letter indicated that she had uncovered evidence of Prince Adrian's involvement in Princess Catherine's death. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Though rumors of the letter's contents had circulated widely, this was the first time that specific allegations had been presented as evidence in open court.
And what action did you take upon discovering this letter? Prosecutor Hartwell continued.
I initiated a discreet investigation into Prince Adrian's movements and activities, both on the night of Princess Elena's disappearance and during the period surrounding Princess Catherine's death 2 years earlier. The evidence I uncovered suggested a pattern of deceptive behavior and access to means that could have been used to commit both crimes.
Captain Blackwood, interrupted Lord Pemberton, rising from the defense table, are you testifying that you took it upon yourself to investigate a member of the royal family based solely on an unfinished letter that could have been written for any number of reasons?
That hardly seems like sufficient justification for such serious accusations. Marcus had expected this line of attack. My lord, I acted according to my oath as captain of the royal guard, which binds me to protect all members of the royal family from threats both external and internal. When presented with evidence that one royal family member might pose a danger to another, my duty was clear.
But, surely, Lord Pemberton pressed, you understood the serious political implications of your actions? The potential for destabilizing the kingdom based on what were essentially suspicions rather than proven facts?
This was the crux of the defense strategy.
Adrian's advocates were not primarily arguing his innocence, which would be difficult given his confession during the confrontation at the monastery.
Instead, they were focusing on the procedural aspects of Marcus's investigation, hoping to create enough doubt about the legitimacy of the evidence to secure a reduced sentence or even a mistrial. My lord, Marcus replied carefully, I understood that failing to act on credible evidence of a threat to Princess Elena's life could result in her death. The political implications, while serious, were secondary to my primary duty to protect the royal family. Queen Isabella watched this exchange with apparent calm, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture. The queen was being forced to weigh the actions of her most trusted protector against the complex political realities of ruling a kingdom. Marcus's decision to act had saved her daughter's life, but it had also set a precedent that could be seen as encouraging the royal guard to investigate and potentially arrest members of the royal family based on their own judgment. The testimony continued for 2 more hours, with Marcus methodically presenting the evidence he had gathered.
The financial records showing Adrian's suspicious transfers of money to foreign accounts.
The witness statements placing Adrian near the stables on the day of Catherine's accident. The physical evidence from the monastery ruins, including items of Elena's clothing that Adrian had cut away during her captivity. Perhaps most damaging was Marcus's account of Adrian's confession during the confrontation underground. The prince's casual admission of murdering Catherine, his detailed explanation of how he had planned to frame Marcus for Elena's kidnapping, and his apparent lack of remorse for the pain he had caused painted a picture of a man whose ambition had completely overwhelmed any sense of honor or loyalty. When the prosecution concluded its questioning, Lord Pemberton rose for cross-examination with the confident bearing of a man who believed he had found fatal flaws in the case against his client. "Captain Blackwood," he began, "you've testified about Prince Adrian's alleged confession during your confrontation at the monastery. Were any other witnesses present when these incriminating statements were supposedly made?" "For other members of the Royal Guard were present and heard Prince Adrian's statements," Marcus replied. "For guards under your direct command, who would naturally be inclined to support their captain's version of events," Lord Pemberton observed. "How convenient. And, I suppose these guards were positioned where they could clearly hear every word spoken during what must have been a tense and confusing situation?" Marcus felt the trap being laid but had no choice but to respond honestly. The acoustics in the monastery chamber were excellent, and Prince Adrian was speaking loudly due to his agitated state. "However, you are correct that my men were focused primarily on ensuring Princess Elena's safety, not on recording every detail of the conversation." "Indeed. And, during this alleged confession, was Prince Adrian under duress? Had he been wounded by crossbow fire from your men?" "Prince Adrian was wounded during his apprehension, yes, but his statements were made before that injury occurred." "I see. So we have the unsupported testimony of 5 members of the Royal Guard regarding statements allegedly made by a man who was being threatened with death in a dark underground chamber. Hardly the ideal circumstances for reliable witness testimony." The defense strategy was becoming clear. Lord Pemberton was systematically undermining the credibility of the evidence without directly challenging its substance. If he could create enough doubt about the reliability of the witnesses and the circumstances under which the evidence was gathered, he might be able to secure a verdict of guilty to lesser charges, which would likely result in exile rather than execution. As the cross-examination continued, Marcus found himself fighting not just to convict Adrian of his crimes, but to defend the very principles that had guided his actions. The defense was essentially arguing that the Royal Guard had overstepped its authority, that political considerations should have taken precedence over immediate threats to royal safety, and that the complex web of noble alliances and obligations made it impossible to treat Adrian like a common criminal. The most challenging moment came when Lord Pemberton asked directly about Marcus's decision to act without seeking authorization from higher authority. "Captain Blackwood, you've served as head of the Royal Guard for many years. In all that time, have you ever before arrested a member of the royal family without explicit authorization from the Crown?" "No, my lord, I have not." "And you were aware that Queen Isabella was absent from the kingdom and could not provide such authorization?" "Yes, my lord." "You were also aware that King Regent William was in the capital and could potentially have been consulted?" Marcus paused, knowing that his answer would be crucial. "My lord, the time required to contact King Regent William and explain the situation would have taken at least 2 days. Given the immediate danger to Princess Elena's life, I judged that delay to be unacceptable." "So you took it upon yourself to make a decision that could affect the stability of the entire kingdom based on your personal assessment of the situation?" "I acted according to my oath and my conscience, yes." "Your conscience." Lord Pemberton repeated the phrase as if it were something distasteful. "Captain Blackwood, how many years of legal training do you have?" "None, my lord." "How many years of experience in adjudicating complex criminal cases?" "None, my lord." "Yet you felt qualified to determine that Prince Adrian was guilty of murder based on your investigation and to take action against him without proper legal process?" Marcus felt the weight of the courtroom's attention as he considered his response. This was the moment when he would either justify his actions or see them condemned as the overreach of an ambitious soldier. "My lord," he said finally, "I am not trained in law or jurisprudence. But I am trained to recognize threats to the royal family and to act swiftly to neutralize those threats. When I saw evidence that Prince Adrian posed an immediate danger to Princess Elena's life, I acted according to my training and my oath. The legal complexities, while important, were secondary to saving her life." The exchange continued for another hour, with Lord Pemberton systematically challenging every aspect of Marcus's investigation and decision-making process. By the time the cross-examination concluded, Marcus felt as if he had been through battle. The defense had not disproven any of the evidence against Adrian, but they had succeeded in raising questions about the methods used to gather that evidence and the authority under which Marcus had acted. As Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, he caught sight of Princess Elena in the gallery. She had insisted on attending the trial despite her mother's concerns about the traumatic nature of the proceedings. Her presence served as a powerful reminder of what was truly at stake in this trial. Without Marcus's decision to act on his suspicions, she would almost certainly be dead, and Adrian would be well on his way to consolidating power within the royal family. The trial would continue for several more days, with additional witnesses and evidence being presented. But Marcus knew that his testimony had been pivotal. The court would now have to decide not just whether Adrian was guilty of the crimes he was accused of, but whether the methods used to expose those crimes were acceptable within the framework of law and political necessity that governed the kingdom. As he made his way out of the Great Hall, Marcus reflected on the broader implications of the trial. Win or lose, his actions had fundamentally changed the relationship between the royal guard and the royal family itself. Never again would the guard's authority be seen as purely ceremonial. The precedent had been set that even members of the royal family could be subject to investigation and arrest if they posed a threat to the crown. Whether that precedent would be viewed as a necessary protection against internal threats or a dangerous expansion of military authority would depend largely on the trial's outcome. The fate of Prince Adrian had become secondary to the larger question of how the kingdom would balance justice, political stability, and the protection of its most cherished institutions. The trial of Prince Adrian was no longer just about one man's crimes. It had become a trial of the kingdom's ability to confront corruption and betrayal within its own highest ranks, regardless of the political cost. And Sir Marcus Blackwood, who had begun this ordeal as a loyal captain trying to find a missing princess, now found himself at the center of a legal and political revolution that would reshape Valdoria for generations to come. The Great Hall of Castle Valdoria had never witnessed a scene quite like this. 7 days after the trial began, Queen Isabella sat in silent contemplation on her judicial throne, the weight of an entire kingdom's future resting upon the decision she was about to announce. The assembled nobility, foreign dignitaries, and common citizens held their collective breath as she prepared to deliver a verdict that would echo through history. Sir Marcus Blackwood stood with his fellow royal guards, his expression carefully neutral despite the turmoil in his mind. The past week had seen testimony that revealed depths of treachery and political maneuvering that shook the very foundations of noble society. Prince Adrian's crimes had been laid bare in excruciating detail, but the defense's systematic attack on the legitimacy of the investigation had introduced elements of doubt that complicated what should have been a straightforward case of justice. Prince Adrian himself sat in the dock with an expression of resigned defiance. The man who had once moved through the castle halls with practiced charm and political acumen now appeared haggard and defeated. Yet even in his current state, there was something calculating about his bearing, as if he were still searching for some angle that might yet save him from the consequences of his actions. Queen Isabella rose slowly from her throne, and the great hall fell into absolute silence. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of 8 centuries of royal lineage and the pain of a mother who had lost one daughter to murder and nearly lost another to the same man's ambition. Prince Adrian of Valdoria, she began, her words echoing off the ancient stone walls, you have been accused of the most heinous crimes imaginable against this crown and this family. The murder of Princess Catherine, your own wife, who loved and trusted you completely. The kidnapping and attempted murder of Princess Elena, whose only crime was seeking justice for her sister. The conspiracy to frame Sir Marcus Blackwood, whose loyalty to this family has never been questioned until you made it necessary to question everything. The Queen paused, allowing her words to settle over the courtroom like a judgment from the heavens themselves. The evidence against you is overwhelming and undeniable. Your own words, spoken in the presence of multiple witnesses, constitute a full confession to crimes that demand the ultimate penalty. However, this court must also consider the manner in which this evidence was obtained and the broader implications of the actions taken to expose your guilt. Marcus felt his heart sink. The Queen's careful phrasing suggested that she was preparing to acknowledge the defense's arguments about procedural irregularities, which could lead to a reduced sentence or even a mistrial. Sir Marcus Blackwood, the Queen continued, turning her attention to the captain of the Royal Guard, your actions in investigating and apprehending Prince Adrian were taken without explicit authorization and in direct violation of established protocols for dealing with accusations against members of the royal family. Under normal circumstances, such actions would themselves be grounds for serious consequences. The murmur that rippled through the courtroom was audible despite the tension. Marcus had known this moment would come, but hearing his actions criticized by the Queen herself still felt like a physical blow. However, Queen Isabella's voice grew stronger. These were not normal circumstances. You were faced with credible evidence of an immediate threat to Princess Elena's life, evidence that subsequent investigation proved to be entirely accurate. Your decision to act swiftly rather than follow bureaucratic procedures saved my daughter's life and exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very stability of our kingdom. The Queen moved to stand directly in front of Prince Adrian, her green eyes blazing with controlled fury. You, Adrian, preyed upon our family's trust and loved to position yourself for power you never deserved and could never legitimately obtain. You murdered my daughter Catherine, who had given you nothing but affection and loyalty. You attempted to murder Elena, whose intelligence and courage made her a threat to your schemes. And you sought to destroy Marcus Blackwood, whose honor and service to this crown have been exemplary. Adrian finally looked up to meet the Queen's gaze, and, for a moment, the mask of political calculation slipped away, revealing the desperate man beneath. Your Majesty, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I never meant for things to escalate as they did. Catherine's death was. I acted in a moment of passion, not premeditation. And, Elena, I never truly intended to harm her permanently. I was trapped by circumstances that spiraled beyond my control. Trapped? The Queen's voice carried all the accumulated pain and rage of a mother who had been forced to sit through days of testimony about her daughter's suffering. You were trapped by your own ambition, your own disregard for human life, your own willingness to betray every oath of loyalty you ever swore. You speak of passion and circumstances, but the evidence shows careful planning, deliberate deception, and callous calculation. Queen Isabella returned to her throne, her bearing now that of a sovereign about to render final judgment. The court finds Prince Adrian guilty of all charges brought against him. The murder of Princess Catherine. The kidnapping and attempted murder of Princess Elena. Conspiracy to commit treason against the crown. The evidence is clear, the confession is recorded, and the crimes demand justice. The hall erupted in noise as spectators reacted to the verdict. Some cheered, others gasped, and a few noble families who had allied themselves with Adrian looked stricken as they realized the political implications of his conviction. However, the Queen continued, raising her voice to restore order, this court must also address the broader questions raised by this case. The defense has argued that the methods used to investigate and apprehend Prince Adrian set dangerous precedents for the authority of the Royal Guard and the treatment of noble families. While I reject any suggestion that these concerns should override the demands of justice, they do require clarification of the laws and procedures that will govern such situations in the future. Marcus realized that the Queen was preparing to use Adrian's conviction as an opportunity to reform the very legal framework that had made his crimes possible. Rather than simply punishing one guilty man, she intended to strengthen the protections that would prevent future betrayals. Therefore, Queen Isabella announced, Prince Adrian will face execution for his crimes, to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence. However, his execution will be preceded by the implementation of new laws governing the investigation of crimes within the royal household and the authority of the Royal Guard to act in emergency situations. The Queen turned her attention to Marcus. Sir Marcus Blackwood, your actions in this matter, while procedurally irregular, were motivated by loyalty and guided by sound judgment. Rather than facing consequences for your decisions, you will be instrumental in developing the new protocols that will ensure future Royal Guard commanders have clear authority to investigate threats to the royal family, regardless of their source. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by the sobering realization of the responsibility that was being placed upon his shoulders. He would not only survive this ordeal but would help shape the laws that would govern the kingdom's response to internal threats for generations to come. The trial concluded with formal sentencing and the reading of the new emergency powers that would be granted to the royal guard. As the court dispersed, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and congratulators, but his attention was focused on Princess Elena, who had pushed through the crowd to reach him. "Captain Blackwood," she said, tears streaming down her face, "thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for having the courage to act when everyone else would have hesitated. You risked everything to do what was right, and I will never forget that." As Marcus knelt before the princess, acknowledging her thanks with the respect due to her rank, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a routine morning inspection had evolved into a life-and-death struggle that ultimately transformed the kingdom's approach to justice and internal security. 3 days later, at dawn, Prince Adrian was executed in the castle courtyard. He died with dignity, acknowledging his crimes and asking forgiveness from the royal family he had betrayed. His last words, witnessed by Marcus and recorded for posterity, were a warning about the corrupting influence of unchecked ambition and the importance of loyalty to principles rather than personal gain. In the weeks that followed, the Kingdom of Valdoria began the process of healing from the betrayal that had shaken it to its core. New laws were enacted that formalized the Royal Guard's authority to investigate threats to the crown while establishing oversight mechanisms to prevent abuse of that power. The noble families who had allied themselves with Adrian faced varying degrees of scrutiny and political consequences, leading to a reshuffling of court alliances that would influence politics for years to come. Princess Elena threw herself into her studies of statecraft and law, determined to honor her sister's memory by becoming the kind of ruler who could prevent future betrayals through wisdom and vigilance. She worked closely with Marcus and the Royal Guard to understand the security vulnerabilities that Adrian had exploited, developing new protocols that balanced protection with the need for royal family members to maintain normal relationships and activities. Queen Isabella, though forever marked by the loss of her eldest daughter and the betrayal of her son-in-law, emerged from the crisis with renewed determination to strengthen her kingdom's institutions. She implemented reforms that improved communication between different branches of government, reduced the isolation that had allowed Adrian to operate undetected, and created new mechanisms for reporting suspicious activities within the royal household. Marcus himself found his position fundamentally transformed. No longer simply the captain of the Royal Guard, he became the Queen's chief security advisor, responsible for developing comprehensive threat assessment procedures and training programs. The experience had taught him that the greatest dangers to the crown often came from within, requiring constant vigilance and the courage to act even when the political costs seemed prohibitive. As winter settled over Castle Valdoria, Marcus often stood on the battlements where he had first made the decision to investigate Prince Adrian. The kingdom below appeared peaceful and prosperous, but he now understood that appearances could be deceiving. The price of freedom and security was eternal vigilance, and the willingness to make difficult decisions when the evidence demanded action. The case of Prince Adrian had taught everyone involved that justice and political expediency were not always compatible, but that a kingdom's strength ultimately depended on its commitment to protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty, regardless of their position or political connections. The scars left by betrayal would take time to heal, but they had also created a stronger, more vigilant realm. Princess Elena, now 20 and preparing to take on greater responsibilities as heir to the throne, often sought Marcus's counsel on matters of security and statecraft. During one such conversation, she asked him if he ever regretted his decision to pursue Adrian despite the risks. Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. "Your Highness, I learned that some decisions transcend personal consequences. When faced with a choice between following protocol and saving a life, between political safety and moral duty, the path forward becomes clear to those who truly serve the crown. I would make the same choice again, knowing what I know now about the costs and consequences." The Kingdom of Valdoria had survived its greatest internal crisis in generations, emerging stronger and more unified than before. The betrayal of Prince Adrian had revealed weaknesses in the system, but it had also demonstrated the strength of character that resided in those who truly served the crown. The price of that lesson had been high, measured in lives lost and trust shattered, but the knowledge gained would protect future generations from similar threats. As Sir Marcus Blackwood settled into his expanded role and responsibilities, he carried with him the understanding that true loyalty sometimes required actions that appeared disloyal on the surface. The greatest service one could provide to the crown was not blind obedience to authority, but the wisdom to distinguish between legitimate power and its abuse, and the courage to act accordingly when the distinction mattered most. The royal guard who had begun this story as a protector of the palace had evolved into a guardian of the kingdom's very soul, ensuring that the principles of justice and honor would continue to guide Valdoria through whatever challenges the future might bring. The legacy of Prince Adrian's betrayal would serve as both warning and inspiration, reminding all who served the crown that with great power came the responsibility to use it wisely, and that the ultimate loyalty was not to individuals but to the enduring principles that made the kingdom worth defending.